Wyoming Territory, September 1877. The stagecoach barreled down the rutted road outside of Sweet Clover, wheels clattering like gunfire, when the back door sprang open and a woman tumbled out into the dust. Isaiah North had only meant to bring a fresh horseshoe to the livery. He stopped dead in his tracks, hammer still in hand, as the riderless stagecoach careened ahead, leaving a cloud of dust and one crumpled figure behind on the sun-baked road outside town. He dropped the iron and ran. She was trying to sit up when he reached her, her gloved hands trembling as she braced herself on the rocky ground. A torn carpet bag lay beside her, half its contents scattered letters, a bonnet, a book with a cracked spine. "Do not move," Isaiah said, kneeling beside her. His voice came out quieter than he meant, but she heard it. Her eyes lifted to his bright green and dazed. "I think I fell," she whispered. "You did," he said. "You fell hard." He could see now her dress was fine, sky blue with white buttons, but the hem was muddy and her left sleeve torn. Blood darkened the side of her forehead, and her hat hung by its ribbon, caught beneath her. He hesitated for just a second, then slid his arms beneath her knees and shoulders and lifted her up. Her eyes widened. "You do not have to, I do," he said. "You cannot walk, and I will not leave you here." She was light in his arms, though he was careful of her head. She blinked up at him, lips parted like she meant to say more, but then her eyes fluttered closed. Isaiah carried her right through town. Folks stared, of course. A woman in a fine dress being carried by the shy blacksmith who rarely spoke more than a few words at a time. But if they asked anything, he did not hear it. He walked straight to his forge, where the heat from the half-banked fire still clung to the air, and the scent of iron hung thick. He laid her gently on the cot he kept in the back room, rolled up his sleeves, and fetched water. When she woke the second time, her eyes moved around the room slowly, taking in the hammer racks, the leather apron hung on the wall, and finally him. "Where am I?" she asked. "My forge," he said. "I am Isaiah North, blacksmith." She sat up a little, wincing. "You carried me here? You fell from the stagecoach. I saw it. I remember the jolt. Then nothing." He handed her a damp cloth. "You hit your head. There is a scrape, but not too deep." "Thank you," she said, holding the cloth to her brow. "I do not know what happened. I was riding to Sweet Clover. I am a mail-order bride." Isaiah nodded, unsure what to say to that. He had heard about the brides coming west, though he never thought much of it. "My name is Juliana Spencer," she said. "I was supposed to meet Mr. Hiram Collin at the station." Isaiah frowned. "Hiram Collin left town 2 months ago. Went to Kansas." Juliana stared at him, stunned. "No. That cannot be. He sent for me." "I know," Isaiah said. "But he is gone." She blinked fast, her breath catching. Then she looked away, toward the open door of the forge. "I have no money. No one here knows me. What am I supposed to do?" Isaiah's chest tightened. He had never been good with words, but he could not bear the lost look on her face. "You can stay here," he said quietly. "Just for now. Until you decide." Her eyes flicked to him, unsure. "You do not even know me." "I know enough," he said. By the next day, word had spread. Isaiah offered her the spare room in the back of the forge, and Juliana, too stunned to argue, accepted. He fixed the broken leg of the cot, and gave her his only unburnt blanket. She cooked eggs on his little stove and swept the dust out of the corners without being asked. She was quiet, but he liked that. And she did not flinch at the sound of the anvil, or wrinkle her nose at the smoke. She asked questions about the forge, and once, when he was fitting a new horseshoe, she watched from the door and smiled. "You work like it matters," she said. "It does," he said simply. He learned she was from Illinois. Her father had died last winter, and her mother 2 years before that. She had no brothers, no sisters. Just a letter from a man who said he wanted a wife and a train ticket to nowhere. Isaiah kept waiting for her to tell him what she planned to do. But days passed, and she remained. One evening, a week after she fell, he found her sitting on the porch step, arms wrapped around her knees. The sun was low, sky orange and gold. "You never asked me why I agreed to come," she said. Isaiah sat beside her, careful to leave space between them. "Why did you?" She was quiet for a long time. Then, "I wanted to be chosen. I wanted someone to want me. I thought if I came out here, started new, I could find someone who needed me." "I know that sounds foolish." "It does not," Isaiah said. "I understand." She turned her head. "Do you?" He nodded. "I know what it is to be alone." She looked at him, then not just looked, but really saw him, like she was trying to figure something out. "You do not talk much," she said. "I never needed to." "You are kind, Isaiah." He flushed and looked down. She leaned a little closer. "That man who sent for me, he is gone. But I am still here." He met her eyes. "You are." Slowly, she reached out and took his hand. He froze, breath caught in his chest. Her fingers were smaller than his, warm and steady. "You carried me home," she said. "I have not forgotten that." Isaiah swallowed. "You were hurt. I am not anymore." The sun dipped below the horizon. He did not let go of her hand. Neither did she. The first frost came early that year, silvering the porch rail and curling the last of the hollyhocks behind the forge. Juliana rose before the sun that morning, wrapped her shawl close, and stepped outside to breathe in the bite of it. The sky stretched pale and empty above her, and the scent of coal smoke drifted faint from down the lane. Isaiah's boots were already gone from beside the door. She found him behind the forge, sleeves rolled, stoking the coals with a measured rhythm. His breath showed in the cold, and a strip of linen was tied around his wrist, fresh, clean where he'd burned himself the day before. "You should let me wrap that properly," she said, stepping around the side. He glanced at the bandage, then up at her. "It's nothing. You said the same thing last time. And the time before that." He straightened, brushing soot from his hands. "You're up early." "I couldn't sleep." She meant it simply, but he stilled a little, watching her too closely. "I'm not troubled," she added. "Only thinking." "About leaving?" he asked. She shook her head. "About staying." He didn't speak, but some of the tension dropped from his shoulders. She could see the line of his jaw and profile, the way his hair curled damp from the heat. "I was taught to sew by a woman who ran a boarding house," she said. "She took me in after my mother passed. I mended sheets and patched trousers for travelers. I could do the same here. There must be someone in town who needs a steady hand." Isaiah nodded slowly. "Mrs. Kittredge at the Mercantile. Her husband's shirts are always torn to pieces. She might hire you." "I'd like to try. I'll walk you there." She smiled. "You don't need to." He met her eyes. "I want to." The Mercantile was a squat brick building along the main dust-packed road, its windows streaked with the last of summer's rains. Inside, the air was warmer, heavy with flour and lamp oil. Mrs. Kittredge was a broad woman with a sharp voice but kind eyes, and she handed Juliana a pile of garments without asking many questions. An hour later, Juliana sat by the forge's stove with a heap of shirts across her lap and a tin cup of weak coffee beside her. Isaiah moved around her, working the bellows, his movements steady and sure. "Did you always want to be a blacksmith?" she asked, threading her needle. "I didn't know what I wanted. I came west because I couldn't stay where I was. Wyoming was the first place I found work." She paused, the needle halfway through the cloth. "What did you leave behind?" He didn't answer right away. The hammer rang once, then again. "My father ran a stable outside St. Louis. He said the war would pass us by, but it didn't. My brother enlisted. Never came home." Juliana looked down at the shirt. "I'm sorry." Isaiah nodded once and didn't speak more on it. That night she stayed up after he'd banked the fire. The oil lamp flickered low, casting shadows along the forge walls. She stitched the last button on a collar and folded the shirt with care. When she opened the door to her room, she found a bundle resting on the cot, a folded length of green calico, a skein of thread, and a set of bone-handled needles. No note. Just the cloth, neatly placed. She picked it up and ran her hand over the fabric. Then she crossed the narrow room and opened the door to the forge. Isaiah stood near the anvil, coat on, as if he'd just come in from the cold. "I found what you left," she said. "I remembered you said you used to sew for travelers. Thought you might need things of your own." She stepped closer. "You think of everything." He looked down, his voice quiet. "Not everything. Just you." Juliana reached for him without thinking. Her fingers brushed his coat sleeve, and she felt him still beneath her hand. "I don't believe in accidents," she said. "Not anymore." He lifted his gaze to hers slowly, like he didn't quite trust what he was seeing. "I didn't come here for you, Isaiah," she said. "But I think I stayed for you." The silence stretched between them, long and steady like the land outside. "I never expected someone like you," he said. "I'm not what I expected either." When he kissed her, it was careful the way he held his tools, the way he measured heat before the hammer fell. His hand cupped the side of her face, warm and calloused, and she let herself lean into it. Outside, the wind rattled the dry leaves along the porch. Inside, the warmth held. By mid-October, the forge roof wore a thin crust of snow each morning, though the sun still cut through by noon. Juliana had brought in a bundle of dried sage from the mercantile's back garden, and the scent lingered in the corners of the workroom, sharp and clean. Isaiah had cleared a place for her sewing chest near the stove without saying anything about it, but every time he passed, his hand brushed the edge, like he was getting used to its presence. That morning, he came in with a length of pipe bent from the frost, his shoulders dusted with ash from the chimney he'd just cleared. "Something's shifted up there," he said, setting it down on the bench. "The draw's been poor since the last storm." Juliana looked up from the wool vest she was altering. "You'll need someone to hold the ladder." Isaiah paused, brushing soot from his knuckles. "You offering?" "I'm not standing out there wondering if you've fallen through the roof," she said, threading her needle again. He grinned, then caught himself and busied his hands with the pipe. Outside, the air bit sharper than the day before. The wind had stripped the last of the cottonwood leaves, and they crunched underfoot as Juliana steadied the ladder against the eaves. Isaiah climbed slowly, hammer tucked into his belt. "Do you miss the East?" he asked without looking down. "I miss knowing where things are," she said. "But not enough to go back." He worked in silence a moment, adjusting the flashing under the shingles. "You're not afraid of hard places?" "I've already lived through worse." He glanced over his shoulder, one hand braced against the roof. "You want to tell me about it?" She tucked her hands into her sleeves. "I was 16 when my father lost the land. He sold everything for train fare and a chance at something better in Springfield. Turned out, there was nothing waiting for us there. He died with his boots still on and a pawned wedding ring in his coat." Isaiah didn't speak, but she didn't expect him to. He came down the ladder slow and careful, and when he reached the bottom, he rested one hand against the post beside her. "You've never asked me to leave," she said. "I wouldn't." "I know. That's why I've stayed." They stood close enough that their breath mingled, visible in the cold. Later that week, she found a parcel wrapped in brown paper on the cot. Inside was a length of flannel dyed a deep rust red, soft and warm. Folded into it was a slip of paper with her name written in a careful, slanted hand. She found him outside, fitting a new hinge to the chicken coop he'd built beside the forge. "I don't have the words for what you've given me," she said. Isaiah kept his eyes on the hinge. "I didn't give anything you hadn't already earned." She stepped closer. "I don't need a wedding dress. But I would like to marry you." He straightened, slow and quiet. "You're sure?" "I am." He took her hand gently, like he always did. Then you will. The wedding was held in the back room of the chapel, with Reverend Halley reading from a worn Bible and Mrs. Kittredge standing as witness, her apron still dusted with flour. Juliana wore a plain blue dress she'd sewn herself, and Isaiah stood in his Sunday coat with a clean shave and his boots polished. They said vows simply, without decoration or fuss. But when Isaiah slid the ring onto her finger, a thin band he'd forged himself from a piece of scrap silver, her eyes shone. That night they sat by the stove, her head resting against his shoulder, the fire casting long shadows along the plank floor. "You're quiet," she said. "Just thinking." "About?" He looked down at her, his voice low. "How I never thought I'd have this." She laced her fingers through his. "Neither did I." Outside, snow began to fall again, soft as ash. Inside, the warmth held, steady and full. The wind shifted in November, dry and sharp from the north, and the forge took on a new rhythm. Horses came through more often, iron shoes clattering across frozen ruts, and Isaiah kept longer hours, his hands always warm from the fire. Juliana started keeping a ledger in the evenings, sitting at the workbench with her sleeves rolled and a stub of graphite smudging her fingers. She tallied orders, names, and dates in careful lines, the pages stitched by hand from scraps of butcher paper. "You don't have to do that," Isaiah said one night, wiping down his tools as she finished a column. "I know," she said, not looking up. "But I like to see what's coming and what's owed. It makes things feel steadier." He leaned on the edge of the table. "You always keep count?" "After my father lost the land, I learned to track every coin. I used to write amounts in the margins of hymnals at church. It was the only paper we had." Isaiah watched her a long moment, then reached across and brushed a thumb across a graphite streak on her knuckle. "You make this place more than I ever did." She turned her hand over under his, palm to palm. "You built it. I'm just helping shape it." They spent Sundays walking the creek bed west of town, where the banks dipped low and the cottonwoods made a canopy of bare limbs overhead. Once, Juliana lifted a smooth stone the color of rust and turned it over in her palm. "I used to think I'd never belong anywhere," she said. He bent to pick up another stone, darker, with a white streak running through. "And now?" She took his hand. "Now I'm part of something that doesn't shift beneath me." In mid-November, a letter arrived addressed to her in ink faded by rain. Isaiah brought it in, still cold from the post wagon, and handed it to her without a word. She opened it slowly, reading in silence by the stove. Her posture didn't change, but her eyes did, focused, distant, then still. "It's from Mrs. Eliza Hart," she said at last. "She ran the boarding house where I stayed before the journey. She wrote to say a girl I knew there, Miriam, passed on 3 weeks ago. Fever." Isaiah set down the kettle. "Were you close?" "She was younger. Not steady on her feet. Always losing buttons. I used to fix her hem before she went to prayers." Juliana folded the letter precisely. "I don't know why it touches me so, but it does." He stepped closer, not quite touching her. "Something stay with you." She nodded once. "I don't want to forget where I came from. Even the hard parts." Isaiah looked at her, quiet and certain. "They made you who you are." That night she brought her sewing basket to the hearth and unfolded a square of dark wool. She cut careful lines by firelight, her scissors whispering over the fabric, while Isaiah read from an old volume of tradesmen's accounts, his thumb marking the place every time she shifted. By the end of the week, she'd finished a jacket for him, simple, with a high collar and reinforced cuffs. She hung it by the door without ceremony. He found it the next morning, just as the sky turned pale with frost. He turned once toward her room, then looked down at the stitching along the hem. There, inside the lining, a single word sewn in red thread, home. He didn't speak of it. But from then on, he wore it every day. Even when the sky was clear and the wind still. When the first December snow fell, soft and dry, they stood on the porch and watched it gather along the fence posts. Isaiah's arms slipped around her without thought, and she leaned into it, her breath clouding the air between them. "I used to think falling off that coach was the worst thing that could have happened," she said. His hand tightened at her waist. "And now?" Juliana turned her face up toward him, eyes bright in the pale light. "Now I know it was the best." He kissed her there, under the creaking eaves and the hush of falling snow, no words needed. Behind them, the forge glowed steady and warm, its door left open just a crack. The days shortened quick after the snow came, and the light turned pale and slanted by mid-afternoon. The forge took on a quieter rhythm, the steady clank of metal softened by the muffled hush of snow along the eaves. Inside, it was warm and close, the scent of coal and pine resin thick in the air. Isaiah had begun teaching Juliana how to temper metal, not to shoe horses or make hinges, but to shape small things, hooks for hanging coats, a simple fire poker, the curved handle of a kettle lid. She watched the color of the iron as it changed, learned how to listen for the pitch of the hammer against the anvil. Her hands were firm, her eyes steady. "You've got a way of watching the heat," he said one afternoon, leaning back as she quenched a glowing bar in the trough. "Most don't see it before it fades." She looked up, hair damp at the temples. "It's not so different from bread. You pull it too soon, it falls. Wait too long, it turns to stone." He smiled, but didn't speak. She liked that about him, how he gave space for things to settle. By mid-December, he had cleared the corner room at the back of the forge and built shelves for her ledgers, her sewing, and the small tin of letters she had begun to keep. One for Miriam, one for her mother. Not to send. Just to say the things she hadn't before. One evening, as the wind picked up and the shutters clattered, she found Isaiah sitting at the workbench with a book open in front of him. Not the trade accounts or the supply catalog, but a collection of scripture readings, the pages browned at the edges. "You read scripture?" she asked, surprised. He looked up slowly. "Not because I was raised to, but because I need to." Juliana sat beside him, the lamp casting a soft pool of light between them. "What do you look for in it?" He ran a finger down the margin of the page. "A reason to keep choosing gentleness, even when the world's hard." She rested her hand over his. "You don't need a page for that. You already do it." He closed the book gently, fingers lingering on the cover. "I never thought it would be seen." That night, she moved her things from the small room behind the forge to the one Isaiah had made ready. Not out of obligation, but because it felt right, like setting a table for two and knowing the meal would be shared. They spent the week before Christmas cutting pine boughs and hanging them over the windows. Juliana stitched a narrow garland from scraps of wool and tied it across the mantel. Isaiah carved a small star from a block of ashwood and set it above the door. Snow deepened, and the town quieted. They stayed in most evenings, the fire warm between them, sharing stories in pieces. Isaiah spoke of his brother's fiddle, long gone, and the way his mother braided her hair with bits of ribbon. Juliana told him about the smell of the baking room at the boarding house, the heat trapped in the walls, and how she used to press wildflowers between the pages of discarded hymnals. "I'd like to plant something come spring," she said one morning, wrapped in Isaiah's old coat as they stood outside watching the smoke curl from the chimney. "Not for use. Just for color." He brushed a thumb across the back of her glove. "There's good ground behind the shed. Get sun all morning." She touched his chest, just above the place where his jacket mended years of wear. "Then that's where I'll plant." On Christmas morning, Isaiah handed her a small parcel wrapped in cloth. Inside was a tin of beeswax polish and a hand-carved sewing awl with a handle shaped to fit her grip. She touched the grain of it, silent for a long time. "You made this," she said, voice soft. "I know your hands," he said. She gave him a length of cotton dyed deep indigo, enough for a new work shirt. Hidden in the folds was a small silver button she'd found at the bottom of her old carpet bag. The only thing left from the journey west. "I didn't think I'd ever have someone to sew for again," she said, her voice catching. "But I do." He pulled her into his arms, the morning light spilling across the floor. We both do. The snow didn't let up that winter. February came, and with it a new rhythm. Isaiah at the forge, Juliana at her bench, meals shared in quiet companionship, and the steady hum of something built slowly and meant to last. Come March, they walked down to the land behind the shed, where the snow had begun to melt in patches. Juliana knelt in the thawing earth and tested it with her fingers. Still cold, she said. But it's waking. Isaiah crouched beside her, one hand on her shoulder. Like us. She turned toward him, her smile slow and certain. Nothing's waiting anymore, Isaiah. We're already here. He kissed her there in the patch of dark, thawed ground, the sun warming their backs, the air still edged with frost. They built a life that spring. The garden grew in crooked rows, full of asters and marigolds, while inside the forge she kept the ledgers and he taught her the weight of metal. Townsfolk came to her with torn sleeves and crooked seams, and left with careful stitches and a touch of lavender tucked into their collars. Their homes smelled of pine smoke and bread, of beeswax and iron. They hung a horseshoe above the door, not for luck, but to mark the place where they had chosen to stay. Nothing about the life was easy. The work was hard, the winters long, and the roads often empty. But every morning, Isaiah kissed her temple before stepping into the forge, and every night, Juliana pressed a hand to his shoulder before they turned down the lamp. Together, they built something neither of them had ever had before. A place to belong. A love that held. A home.